I don't want to become white. I want to grow up, and so should you.
Aren't you perpetuating the white-black problem by criticizing whites and glorifying blacks? If blacks and whites are supposed to be one and the same, don't you think Black History Week and similar days, weeks keep us separate? And of all this, do you feel that racism has accurately been cited as a reason for so many of today's problems?
Well, I'll take the middle question first. I was not joking about White History Week. After all, I was told quite some time ago, when I was growing up, that George Washington couldn't tell a lie. And did or did not chop down the cherry tree, I forget. I'm serious about that. White Americans really do not know their history. And that's one of the reasons they're in trouble. And when I suggest White History Week, I'm not really just making a parody of Black History Week, but I'm suggesting that the truth about this country is buried in the myths that white people have about themselves. And these myths have to be excavated. They can only be excavated by white people. Or, in other words, I may know this history, the history of this country, better than whatever teacher is trying to teach my child. Because it's in my interest to understand it in order to be liberated from it. Most white Americans cling to the idea of being white and, because they don't want to find out what else they might be. But if I know that I have black and white ancestors, so do you. And no one in this country can prove they're white. No one would dare to try to prove that. And I'm not trying to glorify black people or denigrate white people. I'm trying to point out that we are, whether we like it or not, connected, and that a connection should be our triumph and our glory instead of our shame. I have better sense and don't have that much time. I don't have some white person locked up in my skull, walking around me every day and every hour. White people have a black person locked up in their skulls. And that is that's why they treat black people the way they do. If you see what I mean. I want to establish modest proposal, White History Week. But the answer to these questions is not to be found in me, but in that history which produces these questions. It's late in the day to be talking about race relations. What are you talking about? And if as long as we have race relations, how can they deteriorate or improve? I am not a race, and neither are you. No, we're talking about the life and death of this country. And one of the things, I'm not joking when I talk about White History Week, one of the things which most afflicts this country is that white people don't know who they are, where they come from. And that's why you think I'm a problem. But I am not the problem. Your history is. And as long as you pretend you don't know your history, you're going to be the prisoner of it. And there's no question of you're liberating me, because you can't liberate yourselves. We're in this together. And finally, when white people, quote unquote white people, talk about progress in relationship to black people, all they are saying and all they can possibly mean by the word progress is how quickly and how thoroughly I become white.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Africans. Until the lion learns to write, the story will always glorify the hunter. It's true. And this is about perspectivism and how opinions can shape thinking. Throughout this man's life, he was the lion. He refused to allow history to remain told by the hunters of American power. In his 1986, there's a conference speech that he made. Baldwin confronted the gathered journalists and policymakers with the truth that was as old as the Republic of America itself. We know that America attained independence in 1775. So America was founded upon a racial lie. And unless that lie was faced honestly, the country would never find peace in itself. So this speech we are going to expound and have a critical analysis on it. It carried the echoes of his earlier work, especially his famous book, The Fire Next Time, which he wrote in 1963. He sharpened his words for a national audience that still lived in denial. Speaking as both a witness and a survivor of America's contradiction, James Baldwin declared that the country could not afford to evade its history. The fire he spoke of was not a metaphorical alone. It was political, social, and spiritual. It represented the cost of racial hatred, inequality, and silence. Now, this is the speech that I want us to dive on. I want us to listen to James Baldwin give us this speech. He gave it in 1986. I shall get back by the end of the video, of course, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
Thank you all very much. Good afternoon. I am very pleased to be here. I am a little surprised when I knew I was going to come here. Given my luck, of course, the White House was not in trouble. And now I'm terribly aware of that house on the hill, which is in trouble, which means that we are. And I'm curious, I'm just going to improvise around what's on my mind for a few minutes, and then you will ask me questions, and maybe we can have a kind of rap session. If the White House is in trouble, we are. Now the question is how we got there. And I have some suggestions, purely subjective suggestions coming out of my life. But it seems to me that part of what obsesses me, certainly, is what I call sometimes to myself the view from here. Now that implies a great many things. First of all, I'm speaking as an American citizen. I'm speaking also as the grandson of a slave. I'm speaking as a product and a member of a certain democracy, and as a product and issue of a certain very complex history. Someone who represents a very complex country which insists on being simple-minded. Simplicity, it occurs to me, has occurred to me more than once in my somewhat stormy life. Simplicity is taken to be a great American virtue, along with sincerity. And the result of this is, if you are simple-minded enough, you can become, I didn't want to go that far. And as long as you're sincere in what you say, you haven't got to know what you're talking about. These are the American virtues. Two of them anyway. One of the results of this is that immaturity is taken to be a virtue too. So that someone like, let us say, John Wayne, the late John Wayne, who spent most of his time on screen admonishing Indians, was under no necessity to grow up in a movie made during the witch hunt era of American life, when Joe McCarthy, kind of illiterate senator, but very sincere man, was finding communists everywhere. Somebody made a movie called My Son John, which starred, well, I won't bother to talk about the cast. story of a woman whose son turns out to be a communist defector, and she has to somehow reconcile herself to this and cooperate with the FBI to save her son's soul. Perfectly okay, all right. But she says at one point to her husband, who's an American Legion hero, a model of simplicity, and he understands before anybody else does that his son is really a communist. How does he understand this? Because he is such a virtuous American, and is perfectly willing to put his son to death because his son is a communist. All right, I didn't make that movie. You know, it may or may not have made a lot of money, but it represented something in the climate of the times and something very, very profound in the American experience, or the American refusal to endure or accept experience. One of the things, it seems to me, that has always contributed to this adoration of innocence, this adoration of immaturity, so that we really do get representing us a post-adolescent who was almost 80 years old. And we think of this as a virtue. One of the things, though, that has always afflicted the American reality and the American vision is this aversion to history. History is not something you read about in a book. History is not even the past. It's the present. Because everybody operates, whether or not we know it, out of assumptions which are produced and produced only by our history. Now, the history of this country is not bloodier than that of other countries, but it's bloody. It is not more criminal than that of other countries, but it's criminal. Or in short, it is not worse than the history of France or England or any country we can name, but it's different. It's different for several reasons. A few weeks ago, I happened to have the TV set on, and I was flicking it aimlessly for a while, and then I started doing it deliberately. And what was I watching? I was watching a series of images, all of them bloody. Guns, all kinds of weapons, corpses, cowboys and Indians, good guys and bad guys. And for a moment it seemed to me that these compulsive set of images, I presented to myself, I was watching a person, a human being, who was very, 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 very ill and was trapped in these images, could not be released from them, because all of these images come out of the history which we always deny. It is important to recognize that we did steal the land from the people who were here before us. We stole it. And we never honored a single treaty made with that person known as the American Indian. And I repeat, we're not talking about the past, we're talking about the present. We did enslave millions of people for no other reason than because they were black, and we did make a lot of money out of slave labor. Neither is this uncommon. It is a part of human history. But it is one thing to do something and another to deny it. The doctrine of manifest destiny reassured all white Americans that as white people, as the guardians of civilization, they had the right and therefore the duty to exterminate whatever stood in the way of the superior civilization. And as for Sambo, though it can be argued That is, slavery is a strange road to take in order to civilize someone. That was the argument, so that we can see, if we examine our legends, that very shortly after I was discovered in Africa, where I was the sometimes noble savage, I was, in the twinkling of an eye, after the Middle Passage, I am found on the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer backlot, singing and dancing. The noble savage is now transformed into the happy darky. No one quite knows how this happened. We are living with these myths until today. And it corrupts the view from here. Because part of what has happened is in the effort to deny whence we came, we've had to make up a series of myths about it. And myths cannot replace reality. The reason that the Native American is called Indian, for example, is due to a monumental error on the part of adventurer sent out by Queen Isabella of Spain to find a passage to India. Chris got lost. And when he woke up and saw these people surrounding him, since he had to tell Queen Isabella something, he said, "These are Indians," and took one back to Spain. We call this error has persisted in the language until this hour. In a similar way, once I became the happy darky, because if I wasn't the happy darky, then I was a slave. And if I wasn't happy, then something was wrong with slavery. So I had to be happy to keep the master happy, to say nothing, of course, of the mistress. Out of this profound misapprehension has come a system of reality, a system of ideas even, a system of thought, which makes reality very hard to reach. When the slave was discovered and put in chains, obviously he was debased, along with his women and his children. But he was not the only creature who was debased at that moment. The man, the people who put him in chains had also become less than human and debased themselves, with a further disadvantage. Whereas the slave must know the master, because the slave's life is in the master's hands. And the master cannot fool a slave, but the slave can fool the master, because the master wants to be fooled. My father, all the years that I lived with him, never dreamed of telling a white person the truth about anything. It simply never entered his mind to do so. He didn't care what they thought. He didn't care if they lived or died. He loathed them. That was very frightening for me to watch. My turn came too. But I could see what had happened. And really, it's important now is that out of this endeavor, what we call the white American has created only the nigger he wants to see. The reason that's important and terrifying and corrupts the youth in here is because when this same white man looks around the world, he sees only the nigger he wants to see. And that is mortally dangerous for the future of this country, for our present fortunes. The world is full of all kinds of people who live quite beyond the confines of the American imagination and who have nothing whatever to do with the guilt-ridden vision of the world which controls so much of our life and our thinking, and which paralyzes very nearly our moral sense. We are living in a world in which everybody and everything is interdependent. It is not white, this world. It is not black either. The future of this world depends on everyone in this room, and that future depends on to what extent and by what means we liberate ourselves from a vocabulary which now cannot bear the weight of reality. Thank you.
Mr. Baldwin, these questions come from the audience, and I'll ask as many as I can, as I say. And we have a nice wide variety. There is a movement of brilliant young women writers, Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, others. Could you please comment on the influences, including yourself, that have produced this movement?
That's by no means an easy question, is it? Partly because I know all those ladies, and they're friends of mine. And I'm always a little frightened because I'm afraid to leave somebody out. But anyway, I know them all. I'm not sure I can answer your question. I think, first of all, that the arrival of Toni and Maya and Paul Marshall and Alice Walker, for example, Louise Merriweather, was, in a way, inevitable. It had to come about because of the role that black women have played in this country, and more specifically, the role that black women have played in the lives of all black men. And that has always been a very troubled and even dangerous role because of the position of the black man in this republic, which makes the situation of black women who have got to respect their fathers and find a way to protect their sons and their lovers without emasculating them. It is time that she began to tell something of that story. It is in some senses been condemned. But I think I welcome it as the ventilation, so to speak, of a family quarrel. What they have to say is somewhat terrifying, but true. And as for the influences, I hardly know where to begin. One had to go back at least as far as W.B. Du Bois. The influences being, in short, that work done by black people, especially black people, to clarify the role of black people here, because most white historians and most white commentators, until today, are so busy justifying it that they can only lie about it. So that Toni and Maya are excavating us all, helping to excavate all of us from a very dangerous myth.
Do you feel the problems of Southern Africa are properly framed by our media in the context of the American experience, or should these African issues be examined more closely in their own African context?
Well, I think that the American vision of Africa has got to be compulsively defensive. South Africa implicates everyone in this room. It brings into question, or it reveals, the real meaning of the civilizing mission. Because that's how Africa was civilized. But we're watching in Soweto and in Johannesburg, here's the process. No matter how one might want to pretty it up, no matter what Hollywood has told us. The African context in which it should be examined, of course, scarcely exists in the American imagination. And one of the reasons for that is that it brings into focus in the uneasy American imagination the real role of black people in this country in the uneasy American imagination. The truth being, as concerns the presence of black people here, that in the generality, white people have never accepted the real meaning of it and are unable to imagine, even though it is absolutely true, that this is not and never has been and never can be a white country. We have been here together too long. And the vocabulary which we are avoiding has got to deal with that before it can deal with anything as vivid, as dangerous, and as overwhelming as the South African situation.
Here's a related question, sir, that perhaps you can answer. Do you think that this administration, and I assume the questioner means the Reagan administration, has a different attitude toward the black population in South Africa and its concern about the nationalists in Nicaragua? If so, is this racial? You knew they weren't going to be easy.
Well, they have no concern, let's be very blunt about it. I don't think this administration has any concern with Nicaragua either. It has a concern with what it takes to be its interest. What strikes me is that both Nicaragua and South Africa are expected to remain the pawns of the so-called free world forever. Of course we are against the freedom, South African black freedom, because it means communism, or that's what people say. But we are against freedom in Nicaragua for the same reason. And we have not the remotest notion of what we're talking about in either case. Period. And it is racial.
Mr. Baldwin, a questioner wants to know if you've seen the movie She's Gotta Have It. If not, I'll tell you about it after the luncheon. But however, they're not interested in my opinion. They want to know what you think about the movie. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it.
Okay. Well, sorry. Okay. Well, we'll go to another question then. A number of black male writers who have criticized the portrayal of black men as abusers, rapists, addicts. A portrait often drawn by black women and one which black men feel perpetuates a negative stereotype. Do you feel that the image of black men is being falsely portrayed?
I think the image of black men in this country has always been false. You know, it's latent today to blame it on black women. The Color Purple is, of course, the most controversial of these books or movies. And the only way I can answer that question is to say that, well, the movie I thought the movie was awful, really. And in the movie I felt that if you're going to give me that particular man, that black man, then you got to tell me more about him. You know, I can quite see, that black men can do all those things, but then there's got to be something wrong with them. And you'd have to let me know something more than the catalog of this man's brutality. If he were white, then he would be, Paul Newman were playing that cat. You realize he was very, very sick, and he'd have all your sympathy. You'd hope he'd get well. But the black image is very, very different. All you got to do in order to do that is be black. Well, it's an image of black people which is not entirely Alice Walker's fault. That is the way the Republic has seen black people, black men, since they heard of black men. And that has had a terrible effect on black women. And in that context, if the motive is to be liberated from these images by exercising them really, then amen. Freedom is very difficult to achieve, and the process is very, very awkward. But in order to demolish an image, sometimes you have to hold it up to the light and see what weight it will bear, see where it comes from, see if you can live with it, And if you can't live with it, get rid of it. That answers your question.
This one was written apparently as you're answering the last one as a follow-up. Could you please go into detail about the role or the comportment of today's American black male?
The what?
The role.
Oh, the role. Mm-hmm. What should be the role? Well, I have to say something a little difficult, going back into my own history and black history. What should be the role of the comportment of today's American? One of the difficulties about being a black man in this country has always been the difficulty of being a white man, because it is assumed so profoundly that no one has ever questioned it, I think, that the black man wants to be a white man. White men, as I've observed, are not sure they want to be white. It's got to be exhausting. You'd be endlessly flexing your muscles and, you know, conquering the world and smiling. And, you know, it wears white people out. Furthermore, black people are always, in the presence of white people, you're watching an imitation. And you realize this if you try to imitate it, because you cannot imitate an imitation. Therefore, the role of the black man in today's America has got to be what it always really was, or what the Republic always feared it was. He is a man. And a man cannot be told what to do, a man cannot be defined by others. And there's nothing new about that. What the question really means is, how should we alter the American model so that both the black man and the white man can be free? That's what the question means.
I apologize to the person who wrote this because I'm having trouble reading it, so I'll get through it as well as I can. You talk about facing reality, at least by white America. Don't you think it's time for black America to realize that a great deal of its problems are trying to blame them on the past and white America? Isn't it time for blacks to face up to their own realities, to other realities? I think that's the general.
Yeah.
I drifted the question. Excuse me.
Well, I've heard that before. I don't think that black people, in the generality certainly, can be accused of blaming their situation on the past, or indeed blaming their situation on anybody. The situation is much too vivid, much too terrible for that kind of self-indulgence. But it isn't, people I started out with. History is not the past. The situation of the black community in this country is abominable, because this is a racist country, and every institution in this country is a racist institution. And the very last thing the Republic really wants is an autonomous black community. Anywhere. Everybody knows, for example, that if you build a school in a ghetto, you built a disaster factory. And the answer to that is not to bus a child to another neighborhood. The answer to that is to rebuild a city so that human beings can live in the city. Cities are not supposed to be built for money and to make a few people rich. Now, if we want to deal with that, we've got to go there. In the meantime, there's no point in blaming the black community for being upset about the community, because the community has always been involved with the Republic. When we tried before, some time ago, there was a school strike in Harlem in which blacks and Puerto Ricans came into the schools declaring themselves responsible for the education of their children, and it was a very successful strike. I was there, like nieces and nephews in school. It was broken by the United Federation of Teachers and by the city, because they did not want, first of all, that those billions of dollars which is the education system, it is $1 billion business. They do not want that money controlled by blacks and Puerto Ricans. And that is what we're up against, and it's not to pass, and there's no point in blaming black people for it.
A few questions here that are related on a somewhat different topic. Why did you choose France as your residence, or one of your residences? Do you consider yourself an exile or an expatriate? How would you compare the French attitude toward blacks with that of America, or is there as much racism in France as here in the States?
I went to France in 1948 when I was quite young. I went there with $40, no French, no one-way ticket. Or in other words, I was getting out of here. I didn't so much go to Paris as leave New York. And the reason I left New York was because I knew that one fine Tuesday, somebody's going to call me nigger just once too often, and somebody was going to die, and I didn't care which one of us it was. So I split. I didn't know what was going to happen to me in Paris, but I knew what was going to happen to me here. I grew up in Paris in a way, and then I came back. In a sense, one could say that my life in Paris prepared me to go south. Because I would never have gone south if I'd stayed here. I wouldn't have been, if I'd stayed alive, I'd have been a junkie or a prisoner. I'd have been in no state to go to Montgomery, Alabama. As for, I don't consider myself an expatriate. I don't consider myself an exile. I stayed away long enough to grow up, as I put it, and now I'm a commuter, I suppose. And the doctrine of white supremacy, which is what I mean by racism, comes out of the so-called old world. It wasn't born in America, it was brought here. And when I first went to Paris, or to Europe, the French above all could always say, French first of all could say, you must be very happy to be here, but we don't treat Negroes the way you're treated in the States. And we're not racist like Americans are. Well, I looked around me, and I could see that the reason that they could be so tolerant, as they thought, was because they didn't have any niggas in Paris. They were working for them far away, you know, Senegal, Algeria, and so forth. And so it was not a part of the social fabric. And of course it was very good for me in a way, except my mama didn't raise no fools, you know. I realized almost at once that the Algerian was a nigger in Paris. Because I was poor, I was with them, in the same jails with them, the same hotels, sleeping in shifts. Another way they were treated. And in a way, that's what drove me home, because I could see what was happening in my country was the same thing that was happening in France. And since I was not French, couldn't do anything there, I came home because I didn't want to duck it. Now the doctrine of white supremacy, which seemed to have affected Europe less, the cities of Europe, London, Paris, Belgium, Berlin, it's come back to Europe. And the same thing is going on in the European cities as is going on in the American cities. And for the same reason.
How would you compare the artistic and creative climate in France to that in the United States?
Well, I guess the fairest thing to say is that the European experience, let's put it that way, is old enough for them to they're not afraid of artists. Now, this doesn't mean they love them or that they respect them. They just know that every once in a while somebody like that is bound to come along, so they tolerate it. And if you live long enough, or if you are safely dead, they build a statue to you. In the meantime, you're on your own. Thanks.
The questioner asks, as a white person reading some of your stories and books, I felt a great deal of prejudice and hatred against the white race. Did I misinterpret?
A great deal of hatred?
Prejudice and hatred against whites.
I don't think that I have my life's too short, for one thing. No, I don't think it's either prejudice or hatred against whites. After all, if I may say so, I wrote another country. And I wrote Jelani's Room, which can hardly be called anti-white diatribes. But I think that whenever a black person tries to tell the truth about his situation to white people, or to people who think they're white, because white is a state of mind, it's even a moral choice. Every time, if my testimony is true, my testimony is a black citizen of this country, or a black would-be citizen of this country, and my testimony is true, then the American myth is a lie. And when this collision happens, I'm accused of being prejudiced against white people.
After clearly listening to Dr. James Baldwin, here is my deep critical analysis with a touch of deconstruction. You see, at the National Press Club, Baldwin outlined a few urgent themes. The first theme he underlined was the lie of innocence. So what is the lie of innocence? Baldwin argues that America's greatest myth was its belief in its own innocence. He said, what passes for identity in America is a series of myths about one's heroic ancestors. Behind these myths lay slavery, lays lynching, lays segregation, and the daily oppression of black people. You see, Baldwin is forced, or rather he forced his audience to see that identity in America was not built on shared freedom, but on a hierarchy maintained by violence, right? So according to Baldwin, we don't have peace in America. It's a false narrative, right? It's a false narrative. It's a myth, because America is visited by the ghosts of slavery, lynching, segregation, and the daily oppression of black people. We watch in the news police shooting a black person, racial profiling in restaurants, health sectors, schools. We see it everywhere, right? Another theme that Baldwin touches on is the history's shadow, the shadow of history and how it affects black people in America. You see, Baldwin reminds the audience, he reminds us that history is not the past, but the present. Baldwin warned that the wounds of slavery and Jim Crow were not healed, only rebranded under new laws and policies. Baldwin insisted that if America continued refusing to face its history honestly, it would remain trapped in cycles of denial and destruction, right? You see, there is a saying which goes, nothing new under the sun, and what goes round comes round, right? So Baldwin saw all this, and this speech was made in 1986. So tell me, 1986 and right now, this man was very smart. The third theme that Baldwin touches on is the theme of responsibility and witness. Baldwin positioned himself not as a prophet, but as a witness. His power came from speaking truth without flinching. He told white Americans they had to take responsibility for their history and their consequences. His call was not one of hate, but of deep responsibility. For without reconciliation, America would never move forward, right? Never move forward. So we needed to have responsibility and witness. You make wrong towards a particular race, you take the full responsibility. And the witness is the judge and the citizens. You see, the judiciary is the witness. You see, Baldwin also dismantles America's self-image from within. Baldwin does not simply accuse America of racism, no. He exposes the contradictors in its own founding principles. All men are created equal, the nation proclaims, yet its very wealth was created by the labor of enslaved men and women who were denied equality. This contradiction collapses under Baldwin's scrutiny, showing that American democracy is haunted by what it excludes. Even though Baldwin's metaphor in the book Fire, the fire next time, right? It has a metaphorical meaning if you think about it. You see, fire is something which consumes. Fire is something which destroys. Fire is something which, if channeled in the right way, it can be helpful. You see, it's a good servant, but a very bad master. Fire can destroy, but it can also purify and renew. Baldwin's warning was double-edged. If America refuses to face truth, fire will consume it in violence, uprising, and divisions. But if America, if it listens, right, that same fire would cleanse the nation on its lies and bring out rebirth. In this way, Baldwin's language unsettles the audience, right? It offered both doom and hope for those listeners, leaving the choice in their hands. The path a man chooses is his choice, not another man's. And Baldwin truly understood this. So how does this speech, how does it affect you as a black person living in America? Or how does it affect you as a black person living in the world, living on this planet Earth? How does Baldwin's speech affect you? It's a very important question in this. You see, it's now been nearly 40 years since Baldwin made this speech, and his words remain prophetic. The issues he highlighted continue to echo in the lives of black Americans today. The first one is policing and violence. Baldwin warned that state power often turns its guns on the black community. Today, we have people like Ferguson. We have people like George Floyd, the famous George Floyd, from a lady called Breonna Taylor to another man called Tyre Nichols. The problem of police brutality proves Baldwin's point that history is not past, it is present. We also have economic inequality that black people face. Baldwin noted that freedom without resources is meaningless. In this year right now, 2025, the racial wealth gap remains staggering when black families are holding only a fraction of what the white families are holding. The myth of equal opportunity remains a national illusion, right? We also have cultural erasure and denial. Baldwin has spoken of America's refusal to confront its history honestly. Today, debates over school curriculums, ban on teaching critical race theory, and resistance to acknowledging slavery legacy shows that the national myth is still defended at all costs, right? And then another one is the fire this time. The uprising after the killing of George Floyd in 2020 resembled exactly what Baldwin foresaw. When the country refuses dialogue and justice, the streets themselves become the arena where the truth bursts out in flames, protests, and rage, right? So you might ask yourself, sometimes I get those comments, oh, these are very old speech, it does not help anymore, but it does. Baldwin is relevant to black people today as he was. Maybe right now he is more relevant than he was in the past, but he is relevant. That is the main point here. In the 1986 speech that Baldwin made, we need to realize that it is not just a speech, it is a mirror. a mirror of the society. His words demand that America stop pretending and start confronting its foundation. His deconstructive insight that the nation's myth collapse under their own contradiction remains the key to understanding why racial progress feels so fragile. Baldwin shows us that the real battle is not in laws and politics, but in the soul of America itself. For Black Americans, Baldwin remains both a witness and a guide. His courage to speak truth to power teaches that silence is not survival and that dignity is not negotiable. For white Americans, his words remain a challenge to give up the myth of innocence and instead face history and face it honestly. To conclude now, James Baldwin's National Press Club speech in 1986 carried the fire of truth into the heart of America's political establishment. By deconstructing the myths of innocence and progress, Baldwin warned that without honesty, the fire of racial injustice would consume the nation. Today, with the police killings, systemic inequality, and cultural denial still raging, James Baldwin's warning has proven devastatingly accurate. Baldwin's words reminds us that history is not behind us, it is with us. It's not in the past, it lives here in the present. The choice we make remains the same as Baldwin has laid it out. Confront the truth or be consumed by the fire this time. What is the truth? Stop racism. Bring in equality. That is the fire of James Baldwin. Yes. Guys, I hope that you find value in this video, and if you have found value, kindly be sure to subscribe. It helps me a lot to bring you better and good content. Support me on Patreon. You can donate something that God allows you to. I'll still appreciate. And most importantly, share your thoughts on the comment section. Let's continue this discussion. Let's learn more about James Baldwin. I want to hear what you have to say about him. So share your thoughts on the comment section. And see you in the next one. Stay positive.